You know how sometimes a seemingly simple disagreement can just spiral? Especially when lawyers get involved. That kind of behind-the-scenes stuff is what we're diving into today.
Right, the legal wrangling.
Exactly. And you're probably someone who wants the quick intel, the important bits, without wading through, mountains of documents.
Yeah, who has time for that?
So we've zeroed in on some recent legal filings. This involves Blake Lively, Ryan Reynolds, and Wayfarer Studios.
Oh, that case.
And interestingly, we saw a Reddit thread. People were wondering why there wasn't much chatter about some key court documents.
Like things were being missed.
Yeah. And we actually have one of those documents right here. It outlines, a pretty clear fight over scheduling, how fast or maybe how slow this case should move.
Okay, good. Because these high-profile cases, they generate so much noise, right?
Mhm.
But the really crucial details, the procedural stuff, often get lost.
Totally. So our mission, let's call it, is to cut through the jargon on this specific scheduling disagreement.
Makes sense. By looking closely at this, you get a feel for the current temperature of the lawsuit, a shortcut to what's really happening.
And just for context, remind us this lawsuit is about.
It stems from a dispute over a film project, and then there were subsequent allegations back and forth about wrongdoing, media leaks, that sort of thing.
Got it. Okay, so that Reddit observation first. Someone noticed basically radio silence on significant filings. Motions to dismiss, replies, even a judge's order.
Yeah, exactly. In a relevant, neutral online forum. And you can understand the frustration, right? Information overload is real. People want focused insights.
Absolutely. So this deep dive is kind of addressing that directly by focusing just on this one specific letter.
Right, we're drilling down instead of just skimming the surface.
So let's get to it. The core document, a letter from Blake Lively and Ryan Reynolds' lawyers, dated April 10th, 2025, sent to Judge Liman in New York. What's the headline here?
The headline is Opposition. They are formally objecting to Wayfarer Studios wanting more time.
More time for what, specifically?
Two things. First, Wayfarer wants to push back the deadline for amending their main complaint, that's their list of allegations, and potentially adding new parties to the lawsuit.
Okay. And second?
Second, they want more time to answer written questions, interrogatories, from Lively and Reynolds and the other defendants, part of the discovery process.
So Lively and Reynolds are basically saying, nope, stick to the schedule.
Pretty much. Enough is enough. The clock's ticking. But to really get why, you need a bit of background on the court's schedule.
Lay it on us.
Okay, so the deadline Wayfarer wanted to extend for amending their complaint was April 18th, 2025.
Right.
But here's the thing, that April 18th date, that was already an extension.
Ah, okay. So this
Now-
wasn't the original deadline.
No. Normally, under the federal rules, you get about 30 days after the first big court conference to amend things. That would have put the deadline around March 5th.
So they already got an extra month and a half, roughly.
Yes, and importantly, both sides apparently agreed to that initial extension to April 18th. It was baked into the court's scheduling order.
Okay, so now Wayfarer wants another extension beyond April 18th.
Correct. And this is where Lively and Reynolds lawyers draw the line.
And their main argument is,
Their main argument hinges on a legal standard: good cause. They're saying Wayfarer hasn't shown a legally sufficient reason, good cause, for needing yet another extension, as required by the rules, specifically Rule 16b.
good cause. Sounds like you can't just ask for more time because you feel like it.
Exactly. You need a solid reason, often related to diligence or something unexpected happening. And L&R's team argues Wayfarer hasn't met that bar.
What points do they make to support that?
Well, first they point out something interesting. Wayfarer already amended their complaint once, way back on January 31st.
Wait, really? Before Lively and Reynolds even responded?
Apparently so, before any responsive pleading was filed.
Hmm.
And according to this letter, they did it without even notifying the other parties beforehand.
Okay, so Eleanor's lawyers are kind of suggesting, you took your shot early, why do you need another one now?
That seems to be the implication. They argue Wayfarer's current desire to amend isn't because of some new discovery, but because they've now seen the motions to dismiss filed by L&R and the other defendants, the Sloan parties.
So it's reactive, basically. We see your defense, now we want to change our attack.
That's the argument they're making.
Yeah.
And they tie this back to the good cause standard, particularly the element of diligence.
Diligence meaning, like, did they act promptly?
Yes. Were they working diligently? L&R's side says Wayfarer has known about the arguments in the motions to dismiss for about 2 months now.
All right.
And they haven't shown they've been actively trying to fix their complaint in that time. So, not diligent, Therefore, no good cause for more delay.
And they also mention Wayfarer tried to change the schedule before. This isn't the first time.
Correct.
Mm.
They note that Wayfarer tried back on February 26 to modify the schedule, essentially asking to deal with the dismissal motions first, then amend later.
But the other side objected then, too.
Yes. Lively-Reynolds and the Sloan parties objected at that time. So the point L&R's lawyers seem to be making now is, you knew this might be an issue back in February, you didn't properly pursue it then, you can't cry unfair now.
Okay. What about Wayfarer's actual reason for wanting the extension now? They want to wait for the judge's decision on the dismissal motions first.
That seems to be their rationale, yes. They want to see if their current complaint survives before potentially amending it.
It sounds sort of logical, maybe? See if it's broken before you fix it.
Well, L&R's lawyers argue that's not how the rules necessarily work. They say there's no guarantee you get to wait and see. Plus, they point out that Wayfarer did actually ask for leave to amend within their opposition papers to the motions to dismiss.
Okay.
But they never actually said how they would amend it or provided a draft of the new complaint. It was just sort of a vague request.
So no specifics. That probably weakens their argument for needing more time now, I guess.
Arguably, yes.
Yeah.
It makes it harder to show good cause if you haven't shown, what you want to do with the extra time.
And Lively and Reynolds also mention potential harm, right, if the extension is granted. Prejudice, I think, is the legal term.
Yes, prejudice. They argue further delays would harm them. They specifically mention dealing with what they call voluminous and burdensome discovery requests from Wayfarer.
So more waiting means more time dealing with potentially unnecessary discovery.
That's part of it. They also bring up what they term Wayfarer's retaliatory campaign in the media, essentially saying the longer this drags out due to Wayfarer's alleged scheduling issues, the longer they have to deal with negative press potentially fueled by Wayfarer.
Wow. Okay, so they're really connecting the procedural stuff to real-world impact.
Definitely. And they have a backup plan, a sort of if this then that request.
Oh, yeah.
They say, okay, Judge, if you do decide to give Wayfarer more time to amend their complaint,
Then what?
then you should pause or stay all discovery aimed at Lively and Reynolds concerning Wayfarer's claims until Wayfarer actually files a complaint that can survive a motion to dismiss.
Okay, so don't make us answer questions and produce documents about claims that might get thrown out anyway.
Exactly. It's a strategic move to limit their burden if the court does grant Wayfarer the amendment extension.
Makes sense. Okay, that covers the fight over amending the complaint. What about the second part, the interrogatories, the written questions?
Right. So Wayfarer also asked for a month-long extension for those. Their responses were due April 14th.
And the reason?
They claimed the discovery requests from the other side. Lively, Reynolds, Sloan parties were excessive, both document requests and the interrogatories themselves.
Okay, you're asking for too much stuff. We need more time. But L&R are pushing back on this, too.
Oh, absolutely. They make a couple of key points. First, they say, hold on. The number of documents requested is kind of irrelevant to the deadline for answering interrogatories.
How so?
Well, answering written questions is a different task than collecting and reviewing documents. They argue Wayfarer is conflating the two issues to justify the interrogatory delay.
Okay, fair point. What else?
This is quite interesting. They point out that Wayfarer has actually served more discovery requests per party than they have received.
Wait, really? So Wayfarer is complaining about receiving too much discovery while sending out even more themselves?
According to this letter, yes. They even give numbers. Lively served 15 interrogatories on Wayfarer. Reynolds served 36. The Sloan parties served 64 each.
Okay.
But Wayfarer, they argue, would only have to answer a max of 24 questions from the parties they actually sued, plus maybe some from the New York Times, who was also involved.
That context definitely shifts the perspective on the excessive claim.
It does. And L&R's lawyers get even more pointed.
Yeah.
They basically say, look, if Wayfarer didn't want to answer questions from Reynolds or Sloan,
Yeah.
maybe they shouldn't have filed what L&R call utterly frivolous lawsuits against them in the first place.
Oof. Sharp argument.
Very. They also mentioned that Wayfarer could have agreed when the Sloan parties asked to pause discovery earlier, which might have eased their burden, but Wayfarer apparently refused.
So Wayfarer's complaints about workload ring a bit hollow to them.
That's the position, yes.
Yeah.
Wayfarer also apparently claimed they were too busy with extensive briefing on the motions to dismiss to answer the interrogatories on time.
And Eleanor's response to that?
Simply that everyone is busy with briefing. It's a demanding phase for all parties involved. not just Wayfarer. They also note that everyone knew discovery would be happening simultaneously with briefing that was anticipated in the original scheduling order from February.
Right. It wasn't a surprise.
No. And then there was this idea Wayfarer floated about a mutual delay.
How did L&R see that?
They weren't buying it. They argued a mutual delay just benefits Wayfarer, letting them put off their own discovery obligations while everyone else waits. They frame it as one-sided, not really mutual at all.
Just a way for Wayfarer to avoid producing information, basically.
That's the suggestion. It sounds less like a cooperative adjustment and more like strategic foot-dragging from L&R's perspective.
And the letter finishes strongly, doesn't it? By reminding the judge of Wayfarer's previous stance.
Yes, it does. It wraps up by quoting Wayfarer's own lawyers from earlier instances, specifically a Deadline article and a court transcript from February 3rd.
What did they say back then?
Back then, Wayfarer's counsel apparently emphasized how eager they were to push discovery forward quickly, without delay, even suggesting they'd work around the clock if needed.
Ah, so L&R pointing out the contradiction. You wanted speed then, but now you want delays.
Exactly. They're using Wayfarer's own past words to argue that their current request for more time is inconsistent and maybe not made in good faith.
Okay, so pulling this all together then. From this deep dive into just this one letter, it's crystal clear that Blake Lively and Ryan Reynolds are digging in their heels. No more delays.
Absolutely. They are strongly opposing any attempt by Wayfarer to slow things down, arguing there's no good cause, and that delays would be unfair, prejudicial to them.
And the core disagreement really seems to be about Wayfarer's reasons. Are these legitimate needs for more time, or are they, as L&R suggests, strategic moves reacting to the way the case is unfolding?
That's the crux of it. Differing views on the schedule, the reasons for wanting changes, and whether Wayfarer has been diligent. L&R are definitely framing Wayfarer's requests as tactical maneuvering.
And for you listening in, wanting that quick understanding, hopefully breaking down this single document gives you that clearer picture of the friction point right now without you having to read the whole filing yourself.
Yeah, it saves a lot of time and cuts through the noise. But, stepping back, think about the implications.
Go on.
These fights over procedure, over deadlines, they seem technical, right? But they can massively shape how a lawsuit plays out.
True. Sets the pace, influences strategy.
Exactly. So what does this level of opposition, this back and forth, tell you about how each side sees the case, their confidence, their strategy moving forward?
Good question. Makes you wonder what the next procedural battleground will be.
It does. It really highlights how much happens behind the scenes in these documents and letters that ultimately shapes the whole narrative and maybe the final outcome. Something to chew on.